Cloud.
Super.
Super, wonderful. Today we have special guest Brian Nomi, specialist today in evictions. And Brian, why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your practice?
I would be happy to. My name is Brian Nomi. I'm a Camarillo lawyer. I was born in Oxnard. I'm very local to Ventura County. I do more evictions than anyone else in Ventura County. So evictions is my main thing, landlord tenant law, and I'm looking forward to explaining all that to you. Like I say, I'm a local Ventura County guy. I'm married with three children, and that's a very quick background on me.
Wonderful. I know we're working on one right now, but for homeowners and executors who inherit property with tenants, what is the Tenant Protection Act and what are the most important things they need to know before they try to sell their property?
Well, let me take that question apart in two pieces. The first thing is it's way easier to sell a property if the property is empty than if the property has a tenant, especially if the property has a hostile tenant. So I've seen situations where the tenants sabotage showings or refuse to allow showings, but it's just way easier and way more desirable to sell a property to with the property empty. Most people who are buying a property intend to live in the property. So if your property is occupied, then you're limiting yourself only to investor buyers, not to homeowner buyers, which are the vast majority of buyers. So if your plan is to sell, make sure the property is vacant. Now, I'm going to dive right into the Tenant Protection Act, which is really the meat of this presentation. What is the Tenant Protection Act? The Tenant Protection Act is something that totally changed the landscape in California in the year 2020, January 2020, right before COVID. Um, it basically says that if a property is subject to it, then you can't evict a tenant and you can only raise the rent by up to 5% plus the CPI, which this year the CPI, the number is basically 8%. So if you're subject to the Tenant Protection Act and the rent controls in there, right now it's 8% this year. It's been hovering around 8% for the last several years, and you're limited on the reasons that you can ask someone to leave. So those are two important things to know: the rent raising limitation and the reason to evict limitation. So you can, and I'll just run through the four reasons really quickly. The four reasons are family move-in, compliance with the government order, withdrawal from the rental market, and substantial remodel. Those are the four reasons. The number one reason that I'm seeing by far is substantial remodel. Like we're going to put in a new kitchen or a new bathroom, the place is not going to be habitable. The kicker on that is that you must have a building permit and the remodel must take at least 30 days. So that's the limitation. Now, here's what I want your listeners to know. If you're a mom and pop owner, like for example, someone who's running an estate or just someone who owns property for your own family, and it's a single family house, so not a corporation. It's okay if it's a mom and pop, a human being, an LLC, but not a corporation. If you're a corporation, then you're subject to the Tenant Protection Act no matter what. And you give notice, that's the kicker, then you can be exempt from the Tenant Protection Act. And that's the number one thing. Most people are failing to give the notice. So they'll go out to Staples or they'll go to Google or Zillow and they'll find a lease and they won't fill out the lease correctly, or they won't even have the exemption language saying this property is not subject to Tenant Protection Act SB 1482. It's basically some stuff like that. You have to have that language in the lease or you are subject to 1482. That's the thing that people don't get. If you're not doing leasing all the time, you're not going to know that. In fact, I know a lot of real estate agents and a lot of real estate brokers that don't know that. So it's critically important to fill out that form correctly. For those of you who have a little bit of a real estate background, it's CAR form RCJC. That's a specific form on the CAR form software, is RCJC. And the thing about that is people see the form and they don't fill it out correctly, or they don't even include the form at all. That's the mistake that a lot of my mom and pop owners are making. If it's an older lease, we can add that now. That's not hard to fix. But if it's a new lease and you don't put that in, guess what? You're subject to all these protections. The Here's the good thing: if you do it correctly, then you can give a 60-day notice or a 30-day notice of termination for no reason at all. Just, hey, I want to sell the property. I don't want to be a landlord anymore. I have other plans with this stuff. I have other investments I'd like to make. That is a legal decision. As long as you don't do it for an illegal reason, like I don't like ethnic minorities, or I don't like this religion. You can't discriminate on race or gender or religion or things like that. You can terminate with no cause at all. And that's a slam dunk winner to get someone out of your property. Um, Again, getting back to what I was saying earlier, what people want to do is they want to be able to get the tenant out of the property so that they can sell the property. That's the goal here. The property will sell much easier and for a higher price if the property is empty. And I think you as a real estate agent would appreciate that. So that's a quick, dirty overview of 1482. I'd love to hear some questions from you though.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for the insight. So you mentioned if you're subject to, and then you also mentioned the mom and pops. Who
Mm-hmm.
else would not be subject to the TPA or Tenant Protection Act?
Mom and pops and LLCs
Uh-huh.
that are own single families, condos, townhouses, individual separately sellable units. So that
Right.
the key is it's an individual unit. Now, let's say you have a parcel of land with 2 units on it. That's not an individual unit, like a duplex, a triplex, a 25 unit apartment building. Any of those, if it's multiple units, then those would be subject to the Tenant Protection Act. The only exemption is duplex where the owner lives in one half of the duplex. That is specifically exempted. But
Okay.
the vast majority of what I do is mom and pops that own a single family house or condo. That's what I usually see. And that is able to be accepted from the Tenant Protection Act, which gives you a lot more freedom and a lot more flexibility. Um,
Right. Okay, good. If someone inherits a home through probate and there are tenants living there, can they
right,
still sell the property? And how does that affect tenant rights?
right. The number one question I'm going to ask in that situation is show me the lease. And what I'm seeing nowadays is a lease that's from 1995 or something like that or whatever. Usually, they're renting out a single family house in Ventura County for like $1,200 a month when the fair market value in that neighborhood is $4,000 a month, something ridiculous. That's what I see all the time in situations like that. And
Right.
I tell people, if your intention is to sell, we can give the notice saying, hey, this is not subject to the Tenant Protection Act. That's, again, using California Association of Realtors, CAR forms, that's CTT and RCJC. You can do that, no problem. And then we can just give a 60-day notice. So 30 days for the CTT form, changing terms of tenancy. That's what CTT means. Then 60 days for the 60-day notice. That's 90 days altogether. And that's something that I do quite routinely. If the lease was done incorrectly after the year 2020, then we're stuck with that. But the workaround that I have, the brilliant thing that I have is even if you're subject to the Tenant Protection Act just cause section, single families and condos are exempt from the rent cap. So you can raise the rent. So what I'm doing in a lot of situations is just raising the rent. Instead of making it $4,000 a month rent, we might make the rent $6,000 or $8,000 a month rent. And that's usually quite effective in getting the tenants to move out.
I should
Um,
say so.
yeah, it's a workaround for people who have not set up the lease correctly, and it's effective. Um, yeah.
Good.
Just being aware of what the Tenant Protection Act is. If you're managing real property to a tenant, you need to have some basic understanding of it. And there are things you can read. In a few minutes you can become somewhat conversant in it. But for me, I've been doing this nonstop for ever since 2020 when this came out. Every single day I'm looking at the Tenant Protection Act, trying to figure it out. So I think I have a level of knowledge that's better than what most people have. Most property managers are pretty conversant in this. I would say if people have questions, call me. I usually answer the phone. I'm very good about that, and I don't charge for phone calls, so you're welcome to call me anytime. That's a good way to get information. I mean, I'll give out a lease that's compliant for free. The CAR lease is also good, but I have my own form as well that I'm happy to share with people. I just like giving educational materials and giving people some basic pieces of advice, usually at no charge. I'm happy to do that.
Great. And if someone were to call you, what would your number be?
Oh, 805-444-5960. You can also check my website, briannomi.com. No dots or dashes, just briannomi.com.
Good. Okay. And under California Tenant Protection Act, what counts as just cause for eviction and what mistakes do property owners make that get them in trouble?
Just cause for eviction could be there. There's at fault and no fault for just cause evictions. The at fault would be number one, not paying rent. So that you can always evict someone for if they're not paying the rent. Or there's a whole bunch of other things. I don't have the list right in front of me, but causing a nuisance, doing illegal activities, subleasing to other people without consent. The typical situation that I see is someone's committing criminal acts, like they're, beating up their neighbor or selling drugs at the property, or just not paying rent. Those are some examples of, illegal activity that would constitute at fault just cause. The no fault just cause are the things that I mentioned earlier. The owner intends to have a family member move in, or the owner plans to do a substantial remodeling of the property. Those are not the tenant's fault, but then you have the right to give a 60-day notice to terminate that tenancy and have the tenant move out under those circumstances.
Okay. We often hear about cash for keys when a property with tenants needs to be sold. From a legal standpoint, how should owners handle that property?
Cash for keys is a great tool. It's a great tool, and it's great because it's faster, usually. I tell people this all the time. I mean, if you really want a tenant out fast, offer them enough money and they will move out.
Mhm.
For example, if you were to tell a tenant, if you move out tomorrow, I will give you $1 million, most tenants will probably take that deal. Not every
Right.
single one, though. I mean, usually the cash for keys things that I see are in the ballpark of $5,000 to $10,000. In the city of Oxnard, there's now a $5,000 rule, so the floor is $5,000. But you could say something like, "Hey, tenant, you move out, I'll give you the rest of this month for free, or I'll give you next month for free, and I'll give you $5,000 to $10,000." That usually works to get the tenant out. I mean, the only reason I would consider doing something like that is if you had to, like you are a subject to the Tenant Protection Act, and you don't want to go through the hassle of getting the building permit and doing the substantial renovation. You just want the tenant to move out as fast as possible. If you throw enough money at the tenant, then and the tenant agrees, and I definitely recommend putting that agreement in writing. Tenant
Mhm.
will move out by this specific date, and I will pay you this specific dollar amount, and that's in writing and signed. That works quite well. And by the way, there is a CAR form called Cash for Keys. I also have my own Cash for Keys form, but that's something that works quite well. And the big thing to remember about Cash for Keys, you give the cash at the same time that you give the keys. So don't pay the money up front to the tenant, because what I see some owners do is they pay the money. They say, "Hey, I'll give you $3,000 if you move out next week," and then the owner pays the $3,000 to the tenant. The tenant takes the money, and then the tenant says, "I don't feel like moving out." So
Yeah.
only when the tenant's out, the stuff has gone out of the place, and the tenant hands you the keys, that's when you give them the money. It's literally cash for keys. One hand has cash, one hand has keys. You exchange it right on the spot. That's how cash for keys works.
Yeah, brilliant. Very good.
Have you
Now,
done
what
that
are
before, Eric? Yeah.
we're in the process of doing it right now
Well,
as we
yeah, that's
speak.
true. That's true.
What are the biggest legal risks that you see when property owners or executors try to remove tenants or sell a property with tenants in place?
Uh, there's nothing wrong with that. You just have to be sensitive to the tenants. So the tenants, your question assumes that the tenants are staying there, and the property owner is just going to be selling with the tenants still
Right.
there.
Yes.
So obviously, you have to have showings, you have to have inspections, you have to have appraisals, all that. All of those things require entering the unit. Just be very sensitive to the tenants. Give them plenty of advance notice. The law requires at least 24 hours advance notice before a showing, or
Mhm.
any sort of like inspection. Um, that's the biggest thing. Just make sure you're complying with the 24-hour rule, and not causing trouble. On the other side, I have seen situations where tenants refuse to allow any type of inspection or showing, and that can be problematic. You then have to give the legal notice. You would have to have the police show up and then make the tenant stand aside, and that's obviously going to be a very uncomfortable showing to any prospective buyer to have the police sitting there watching this happen.
Yeah, I actually had to do that in Oxnard for an inspection, and it was very uncomfortable.
Right, right.
Last question. Can tenants stop a probate sale or delay the sale of a property?
Can they stop a probate sale? I mean, probate sales are usually done as is. You just go to the
Yeah.
probate court and bid on it, is what I understand how that works. Or, the probate court authorizes a sale. It's the same thing. Can tenants stop that? Not really. They can stop showings, they can stop appraisals, but the solution is what we just talked about. You have the police go in there and just make them step aside. Um, it is completely lawful for a seller to sell a property to someone else without the tenant's consent whatsoever. The only leverage that the tenants have is to screw around with the showings and the inspections. They can't really do anything else to stop the sale.
Right. Now, I know you mentioned that Oxnard has that specific $5,000. Do any other
Yes.
cities in the county of Ventura have something similar?
City of Oxnard, City of Ojai. City of Ojai is really small. I mean, the population of Ojai is only 3,000 people, and single families are exempt from that. So
Uh-huh.
most of Ojai doesn't matter, but City of Oxnard is huge, and that's where I'm finding most of these problems happen. So the rule is not just a $5,000 rule; it's $5,000 or 2 months rent, whichever is more. So if you're
Yeah.
renting the place out for 4,000 a month, guess what? It's not 4,000, 4,000 or 5,000. It's 8,000, 2 months
Right.
rent.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know any place in Oxnard other than maybe a studio that's renting for less than 2,500 right now. It's usually these older properties, that are renting out for 1,200 a month. Guess what? We have to give them 5,000. But I have had other situations where we had to give the higher number one that's 2 months rent. And I
Right.
can tell you that every single tenant in Oxnard, including the ones that speak no English whatsoever, they all know about the $5,000 rule. So
Yeah.
the landlord, you know, be sensitive to that and know that the tenants are out there. They if you're asking the tenant to leave, they're going to be asking for their relocation payment, especially in the city of Oxnard. Statewide, the rule is much easier. The statewide rule is if you're subject to the Tenant Protection Act and you give a 60-day notice, all you have to do is give last month's rent free. To me, that's no big deal. The city of
Right.
Oxnard requires you to pay a check within 15 days of serving the 60-day notice for the 5,000 or 2 months rent, which is a much harder rule for people to swallow.
And in addition to that, they get the last month free as well.
I take that position. Yes, yes, I think
Right.
that's correct. So
Right.
look at how nice that is. They get $5,000 and the last month free. You know, the good thing about that is it usually works. When you do it, the tenant gets all this money up front. They usually do move out 90% of the time, but it does happen 10% of the time. The tenant takes the money, takes the free rent, and then just says, "Haha, I don't want to move." That
Right.
happens too.
Right. And then what's the process?
We go to eviction court. Eviction court in Ventura County takes about 70 days,
Hmm.
approximately.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And you can help out with that.
Pardon?
You can help out with all that going to court.
Evictions is what I do.
Right.
Evictions. I'm the number one guy for Ventura County for evictions. I'm in the eviction court all the time. It takes about 70 days to do an eviction. That's what we're trying to avoid is going to court. We just want to sell the property. Get the tenants out and sell the property for the best price. That's usually what we're doing. But if the tenant just says, "I'm not moving out" and has no legal basis, that's where I come in with filing lawsuits in court and getting the sheriff over to permanently remove people from properties.
Right. Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And this has been a very valuable resource, and I'm sure lots of people find it helpful and find you through the process.
It's a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye.